Hello everyone and welcome back to another Sensei series. Today we're looking at 5 music theory tricks made simple. The tips that we'll be looking at today will apply specifically to the harmony or chord progression side of things. Now I'll do my best to explain this stuff so that someone who has never studied theory can understand what I'm talking about. However, if you'd like a deeper look at any of this stuff, or you just feel like you could use a touch-up on the building blocks of theory, I'd recommend checking out my course, The Rudiments, which teaches music theory from the ground up with the guitarist in mind. If you do want to check that out, I made 25 half-off promos. Use code TRICKS at checkout on The Rudiments over at samuraiguitartheory.com. I'll also put up links for that in the description. All right, let's get to these music theory tricks. The first one is something that I absolutely love. I call it the 50s slow dance chord, though the technical term for it is the subdominant minor. I'm just going to play a chord progression and I'll make it especially clear which chord is the special one. So while I think of this chord as something that one might hear if they stumbled back in time to a slow dance at their grandparents' prom, it really is a great flavor and has many uses. Here's what's going on here. If you take a major scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and build a chord off of each one of those notes, you would first get a major chord off the first note, minor chord off the second note, minor chord off the third note, major off the fourth, major off the fifth, minor off the sixth, and a diminished triad off the seventh before you're right back where you began. The 50 slow dance chord is simply changing the major chord that you would play off the fourth note and turning it into a minor chord. Since this chord has a strong, distinct flavor, I'll often try to put it in places where it really stands out. That might be during a long dramatic pause, or maybe I'll first play that fourth chord as a major, then as a minor right after, so you can really hear the contrast, something like this. That is really all you need to know to incorporate this trick, but if you want a deeper explanation as to what's going on, here it is. In the same way that you can build chords off of every note in a major scale, you can also build chords off of every note in the natural minor scale. If you build a chord off of the fourth note in the natural minor scale, you will get a minor chord. What you're doing when you play that 50 slow dance chord is borrowing the fourth chord from the minor scale and using it as the fourth chord in a major scale setting. This is somewhat unexpected, but also not totally out of left field, so it creates an interesting flavor. The next trick is what I think of as setup chords, though the technical term for them is secondary dominants. One of the key components in music is creating tension and release. The easiest way to explain this is just by showing you what I mean. This is tense and it releases nicely into this. Tension, release. The most common chord for creating tension is a dominant 7 chord, like this one, which will commonly release down the musical spacing of a major fifth into a major chord, like this one. Together, that sounds like this. If we put names to these chords, we have a G7, going down a perfect fifth, to a C major. Alternatively, you could think of it as a G7 down here, going up a perfect fourth to a C major. Same thing, just different octave. And on guitar, I just think if I have a dominant 7, where the root is on the A string, it releases down to the E string, 2 frets that way. Or if I have a dominant 7, where my root is on the E string, it releases to the same fret on the A string. Now remember in the last example where we played chords off of every note in the scale, the only dominant 7 that I can play in the scale without using notes from another scale is built off the 5th scale tone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this dominant 7 typically resolves down to the first chord in the scale. So that is what we would expect to hear. It's pretty basic theory stuff. Here comes the trick. You can bring in an unexpected sense of tension and release by setting up any chord with a dominant 7. Let's do an example and I'll show you what I mean. Say I have a chord progression that goes from the 1 major to the 6 minor chord. It wouldn't have a whole lot of movement in it and it would sound like this. But if I change that up to go from the 1 major chord to the 3 dominant 7, and then to the 6 minor chord, I've now brought in a new sense of character that really perks up the ear. Take a listen. If we recall, the chord that we would normally build off of the 3rd note in the major scale usually would be a minor chord. In this setting, we're turning it into a dominant 7 chord, and this works because it creates an unexpected sense of tension, which resolves nicely into that 6 minor. I can use this trick to set up any chord. All I gotta do is just kind of think backwards. If I'm trying to get to a chord that's rooted on the A string, then what I need to do is play a dominant 7 chord that's rooted on the same fret of the E string, or if I'm trying to get to a chord that's rooted on the E string, then I need to play a dominant 7 that's on the A string, 2 frets that way. Let's do a few more examples of this. Say I'm on the 1 chord, and I want to get to the 4 chord. Well, what I can do is turn my 1 chord into a dominant 7, and that takes me nicely to the 4 chord. Or say I'm again back on my 1 chord, and I want to get to my 2 minor chord. I would do that by playing the 6 dominant 7. Nicely into that 2 minor chord. And now let's say I want to get to the 5 dominant 7 chord. Well, I would turn my 2 minor now to a dominant 7, which resolves nicely into the 5 chord, which pushes nicely back home to the 1. That, my friends, is secondary dominant setup chords. Gotta love them. For my next tip, we're heading into the wonderful world of rhythm. Trick number 3 is simply avoiding common rhythmic tendencies. When we're writing and playing chord progressions, it's easy to gravitate towards some common habits. For example, we might change the chord on the downbeat of every bar every time, which would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but something you might want to think about to give a song a sense of forward motion is playing each one of those chords a half beat early, which would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 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 1, 2, 3, 4. Another common tendency is to stay on each chord for the same length. For example, writing a song where every chord lasts for 1 bar. But what if I have a chord progression where in the first part, each chord lasts 1 bar, and then in the second part, each chord lasts 2 bar? This contrast really adds a nice flavor. Check it out. Another common tendency is to think of my chord progressions and sections in chunks of 4. For example, C for a bar, G for a bar, A minor for a bar, F for a bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, repeat forever. But if I start adding a bar here and there in places where I really want to make it feel drawn out, it can create a nice, unexpected sense of tension before leading into the next section. Here's an example. The first time through will be a 4-bar chunk, but on the second time through my progression, I'll add a bar at the end, see how it makes it feel. Moving on to trick number 4, the diminished 7 climb. Anytime you come across a diminished 7 chord like this one, you can play that same shape 3 frets higher, which you can play again 3 frets higher, which you can play again 3 frets higher, and again 3 frets higher, until you're an octave above where you started. Sounds like this. I call it the diminished chord climb, but you could also do it descending. And really, that's all you need to know to start using this. Anytime you come across a diminished chord, you can move that same shape up and down 3 frets for some cool sounds. But the theory behind it is actually pretty cool, so let's check that out for some bonus marks. If we were to break down, say, a C diminished 7 chord, and look at the individual notes that make up that chord, we would find out that they are C, E flat, G flat, A, and then back to a C an octave higher. If we then look at the spacing between these notes, from C to an E flat is a minor third, or 3 frets on the guitar. From the E flat to the G flat, minor third, 3 frets on the guitar. From the G flat to an A, another minor third, and from the A to a C, yet another minor third. All the spacings are the same, giving us what's called a symmetrical chord. This also means that if I build a diminished 7 chord off any of those other notes that make up the C diminished 7, it's the same set of notes. So for example, an E flat diminished 7, same set of notes as a C diminished chord. If you don't believe me, let's check it out. E flat diminished, E flat, G flat, A, C. G flat diminished, G flat, A, C, E flat. So when I slide around that diminished 7 chord shape, 3 frets at a time, I'm not changing any of the notes, I'm just playing them in a slightly different order. And my last trick for today is the tritone substitution. I think this is one of the coolest tricks out there, not just because of how it sounds, but also because of the theory behind it. Okay, so remember how the dominant 7 chord creates the tension? Well, it does so because of these 2 notes here. The musical spacing between these 2 notes is called a tritone, and the nature of how these 2 notes ring out and collide with each other makes them sound very dissonant. The chord that I'm playing here, G7, which resolves nicely into the C major, is made up of the notes G, D, F, B. The notes that create that tritone or that dissonance are the F and the B. Here's where the trick comes into play. There is one other dominant 7 chord that creates tension using those same 2 notes, F and B, and that chord is a D flat 7. A D flat 7 chord has the notes D flat, F, A flat, C flat. C flat is more commonly called a B. And if we remember, it's the tritone between the B and the F that release into the C major chord. So really all the other notes aren't really as important. Therefore, a D flat 7 chord can resolve into a C. So what I can do with this information is whenever I see a G7 resolving into a C major, which is quite common, I can replace that G7 with a D flat 7. I get that same sense of tension and release while also subverting the expectation. So say I have a chord progression that goes D minor 7, G7, C major. I can place that G7 with a D flat 7 to give me this. If you want to apply this specifically to guitar, anytime you come across a dominant 7 chord rooted on the A string, like my G7 here, you can substitute that with a dominant 7 rooted on the E string, 1 fret closer to the nut. Or if you come across a dominant 7 rooted on the E string, you can substitute that with a dominant 7 rooted on the A string, 1 fret closer to the bridge. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. 5 wonderful music theory tricks made as simple as I can possibly make them. Remember, we're only peeling back one layer of the theory onion here. To really understand this stuff and truly feel comfortable enough to incorporate it, you want to have a strong grasp of theory from the ground up. And the best place to start, in my opinion, is my course, The Rudiments. The course is professionally animated to make the tough stuff easy to understand and builds a strong foundation right from the beginning. There are interactive elements to keep you engaged, quizzes, lists of things to work on, documents, stuff like that, and the first 25 of you to use promo code TRICKS will get it for half off over at samuraiguitartheory.com. I'll also put up links in the description. Thank you all for watching. If you want to get caught up in the Sensei series, hit that link up there. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and stay tuned for a wide range of musical content. Until next time, look after each other, look after yourselves, look after the planet. I'm Samurai Guitarist, and we'll see you again soon.